Welcome to Out is Through, a podcast about living a meaningful life in difficult times. I'm Larry Lariosa, and I'm a life coach and licensed marriage and family therapist. In these uncertain times, maintaining a sense of well being and purpose feels more challenging, yet more important than ever. In this podcast, I'll feature guests who have used their life experience, passion, and creativity to find personal meaning and deeper connection. As the saying goes, the only way out is through. And I hope these conversations help inspire you to live life to its fullest. So thanks for tuning in and enjoy the episode. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Out is Through, a podcast about living a meaningful life in difficult times. My name is Larry Lariosa, your host, and I know it's been a while between the last episode and this episode, and to be honest, I needed a little bit of a break. I went to Mexico City and San Miguel de Allende and got back right in time for the holidays where I'm going to take another break. But I wanted to get these last few episodes for the year out to you. And so today's episode is one that I am really excited to share with you. It's with author and creator Christie George. We'll discuss her inspiring new book/book report, The Emergency Was Curiosity, and have a deeper conversation about creativity, productivity, connection to self and others. Topics I think that are timely in the current world we're living in. Christie George is a writer, curator, and producer who has been working at the intersection of media, technology, and social change for more than 20 years. She started her career at Women Make Movies and was the president of New Media Ventures for a decade. In her creative practice, she's particularly interested in collaborative art, especially work that explores and expands the idea of collective authorship. Christie recently released The Emergency Was Curiosity, an illustrated book report, exhibition, and event series about cultivating creative attention. Hi, I'd like to welcome to the podcast Christie George.
Thanks so much for having me, Larry.
You're welcome, and I am so excited to have you. I've been on the podcast. We talked about a month or 2 months ago, and I got excited about our conversation around connection, connection and slowing down and what we miss when we don't slow down. And we're going to talk about The Emergency Was Curiosity, which is, of course, your pandemic baby, and I'm sure ongoing life work. And really want to honor that. I think this is such an important conversation to have now because while we are not in 2020, a lot of us have kind of moved on from the pandemic, and that's a good thing. But there were a lot of lessons we got from the pandemic, and in moving on, sometimes we forget that it doesn't have to be this way, that we can slow down, that we can be in touch with ourselves, with the world around us, that we don't have to always be on autopilot. And it's just so ingrained in our society to just do, produce, which I think is the double-edged sword, because there's a lot of beautiful, great stuff that happens in our work and in our productions, but there's a loss of humanity and a loss of connection, which I'm sure we'll get to. With that said, I always start these podcasts checking in with everybody. We are in difficult times, especially since the start of this year, and I can't believe we've almost made it through a full year. So just want to check in with you. How are you doing in these times?
Right this very second, I am grieving someone who was close to me, who I lost a couple of days ago, or who we lost a couple of days ago. And so I've been really just sitting with the grief of that and also sitting with the beautiful community of people that she cultivated, created, held all around her. So it's like a very um life is lifing very hard today, in both the like really tragic ways, but also because I've been in touch with a lot of shared people over the last couple of days, also like incredibly beautiful. So that's like where I'm at right now. I wasn't sure whether I was going to like share that here, but it also feels like so much of this project was really supported by her. Her name was Jessica Clark. She's a
Mm,
real visionary, futurist, dot connector, and I loved her.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And grief has been on my mind. I shared in the podcast that I lost my mother in law, and episode 15 really focuses on transition and loss with my friend and former colleague, Misty Lauderly. So this is right in line with that. And it's hard. Grief is hard. We don't always live in a society where we take time to grieve and honor that, and which makes it that much harder, right? Kind of everything is not normal and we have to act like everything is normal because of demands that might be on us around work or family or whatever. And so I just appreciate you making that space just to name it like that. And that was a big thing Misty had talked about, just naming that we're grieving. There's an honor that can come with that that allows us to just carve out that space that we need to be delicate with ourselves, and please be acknowledging that I am not just moving as normal, that this is actually hard to do life with loss and grieving someone and that being heavy on our hearts.
Yeah, I think a past version of myself would never have even mentioned it in the context of this conversation. Like, I'm traditionally a super boundaried person, doesn't necessarily feel like appropriate or something in my mind, and I really have come to believe in both what your colleague identified as just the power of simply naming, and also the more people that name, the more permission you give to other people to name. And then the last thing is that I feel so much because of my experience of sharing this project in the world, I feel so much more in touch with how many people are like walking around grieving. And I just would have had no idea. I really feel kind of like, oh my God, has this been happening the whole time? And I just like was so clueless or wasn't really asking people what was really going on beyond how are you? Or I don't know who decides, like, what normal is or something, but I do now feel like it's such a scam because it turns out that everyone is holding on to, like, really a lot as they go through the world, and so whatever that normal thing is actually doesn't exist. It's a little bit like the emperor has no clothes. Naming it is, like, the first step in figuring out where we get to.
Yeah, yeah, and I think even my when you shared that, my immediate response was, "Oh my gosh, I'm grieving too." And
Totally.
that starts a connection, that starts a
Mhm.
level of empathy. Even though my grief might look different than yours,
Yeah.
it's still a shared experience of we're this very normal, heartbreaking, and difficult experience is something we all we all grieve. And so again, I appreciate sharing that. I
Mhm.
also want to apologize. My dog I can hear in the background. So
I
it's
think to me it's like perfect, you know? It's just like we're doing our podcast and our dogs are here and our kids are here, and one of the things that actually I used to talk to Jessica about a lot is how grief has to happen like basically alongside like personal admin or whatever, Zoom call you have that day. And so I think the dog is just about perfect, and hopefully you don't edit your dog out.
he would appreciate that. Well, this is going to be a great conversation. I can already tell. So let's just kind of rewind and start with your story and your upbringing. Where did you grow up? And how do you think your early story informed the person you are today?
I forgot that you are a trained therapist. Um, I'm, like, really bad at answering those kinds of questions. I haven't done enough work. But the short story is that I was born in the Bronx, to immigrant parents from India. I grew up, in the suburbs of New Jersey, a very, like, classically suburban existence. It was kind of a type A personality, went to great schools. I don't know, sometimes I think I have a lot of, like, productivity bro in me or something. Like, I like being productive, I like getting things done. I have a high bar for excellence and all that kind of stuff. So I mentioned that just to say that so much of this project has been about unlearning that to a certain extent. And I I think I was always like creative, but not in any way that manifested in like classes that I took or anything like that. Like I didn't take art classes in even high school, I don't think, or college. I think I liked crafting maybe when I was a kid. Is maybe the only like hint of early creativity, but part of the point of my own project or sharing it beyond my circle of immediate friends and family has been kind of realization that everybody's creative and that you don't have to have self-identified as creative in order to like either benefit from having creativity in your life or even to need permission to do any kind of creative work. And so much work that happens in the world is actually creative that isn't identified that way. So the only biographical addition that I might add now is that I, did move away from home, so I don't see my, family as much as I would like, but my sister is visiting now. I live in Northern California now and try to get home to New Jersey when I can, usually during the holidays.
And you mentioned being kind of a type A personality as a young person, and sure, I think being type A, it leads us to creative lives, but it also, like, I just wonder professionally where that landed you and going into 2020, where you were at right before you found the book How to Do Nothing by Jenny Adele. You can tell us a little
Yeah,
bit.
thanks for the
Yeah.
reminder. Yeah. I have worked in media for my entire career. So after college, I worked at an indie film distributor called Women Make Movies, mostly on the business side. So I would acquire and distribute documentaries directed by and about women. I did that for many years without having what I thought was like a education in business. I had never even taken any finance classes as an undergrad. So I went to business school after that. And I went to Oxford. So I was in England during the '08 election and had a feeling of having missed a kind of hope and change moment that I had been working for my entire adult life or something, and came back to the US in 2010 with the idea that I would start some kind of media fund. But I graduated business school the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed. So it was kind of like a terrible time to like start any kind of fund. But I got connected to a group of technologists and progressive donors who were trying to figure out a way to support progressive media startups with flexible kinds of money, leveraging the scale that was possible through the internet and through software, and helped get an organization off the ground called New Media Ventures, which was kind of like a combination between a foundation and a venture capital firm, like a seed fund that gave small amounts of money to entrepreneurs and activists that wanted to start media projects and progressive power building organizations. And I did that for 10 years. What I thought would be a sort of experiment that I could do part time turned into 10 years and an organization. And it was in that time that I had read Jenny's book, How to Do Nothing, which came out in 2019. I was on parental leave with my second child when I first read the book. Even now, I find it amazing that I read a full book in that time, and that book in particular, but I think that book hit me in the right moment, like the liminal space of having the luxury of parental leave when you've just had a baby is a very specific space, and I just loved the book when I first read it. I gave it to everybody I knew, and that book is about, for those who haven't read it, it's about social media and the attention economy and ways that we might be more intentional with our own attention. It's also about interdependence and developing a relationship with the place around you, which includes both neighbors and the more than human world. It covers a lot of territory. It's an unusual book, but really beloved by lots of people. And I found myself in the spring of 2020 just like remembering the book. I found it to be so prescient and relevant for the challenges that we were facing in that very specific time, especially during kind of the quarantine lockdown moment when all we had was nature and you couldn't really be with people. So how do you be in solidarity with people somehow in that moment? And so that's sort of when I found that book.
Yeah, there was so much happening then, and I mean, if we even rewind, I forget that she wrote the book before the pandemic
That's what's so
because it was
amazing about it. I know.
it's almost like she foresaw what was gonna happen, and I've seen a lot of interviews with her in researching my interview with you that just, like, I mean, she totally saw it. She and this crisis we're in around connection and or loneliness and disconnection and how our productivity mindset is really, like, taking away our humanity. I wonder because I mean, when I think about the early part of the pandemic, it's something I would like to forget, but everything around washing vegetables when you get home to, um, being afraid of your neighbor and when you're on a dog walk, all of those things that just feel just so disconnecting. How did you go from reading the book and it resonating with the time, space, and mindset you were in to actually, like, doing something with it? And what were the life circumstances besides maybe the pandemic, but I'm sure the pandemic being a big part of it, that caused this emergency of curiosity that you had?
The pandemic was a big part of it. And it's always really important to me to underscore that because, as someone who's new to creative work, one of the things that I think it's important to be honest about is sort of how do you actually like make the time and space to do creative work in the middle of childcare and paid work and community work and reading the news and having feelings about what you've just read in the news. And um, I would never, ever have done my project hadn't if it hadn't been for the like massive disruption of the pandemic, creating kind of space, sort of a weird combination of space and time. And in my case, I had also just coincidentally left a job that I had for 10 years. So I had a cushion of 6 months that I knew I was sort of gonna be off with not that many deliverables. And then in practice, because of the pandemic, I moved to a very rural place from downtown Oakland, and as the project continued, I was in a place where my expenses were reduced dramatically. So this all of this kind of comes into play much later, but I wanted to mention it now in part in case I forget, but because I, as someone who is new to creative practice and trying to understand how people make a creative life work, people don't often talk about the money part, and they don't talk about like what privileges they have or what cushions they have or They're circumstances that allow them the time and space to actually do creative work. And so I was in a very, very unique situation, as bleak as it was for other people also in terms of those like early days, but also with sort of like I was working full time up until part of it. So I had a little bit more time and space. But the so that's one piece of it, and then the second piece of it is that it never really occurred to me what this output would be. When I first started this project, it was because I found myself remembering Jenny's book and, like you, being sort of blown away by the fact that she had written it an entire year before, but had somehow it was like a manual for getting through the pandemic, and I started copying passages from the book that I loved and that I wanted to remember, just on pieces of paper. I have always found that writing down passages, not so much notes, but just word for word, copying quotes from a book, for me is a way to slow myself down. I'm a very fast reader and essentially retain very little. And so if I don't writing something down is a way for me to slow down and sort of read more carefully, understand a book's ideas, internalize them, and in the case of this particular book, it became like a practice of attention. Sometimes I liken it to meditation. I'm not someone who meditates, but the whatever it is that people have access to through meditation, for me came as a result of just copying down passages from this one book, kind of over and over and over the course of days and weeks and months. And I really just love the practice of it, and eventually started making little doodles to illustrate the quotes that I had copied down, and then started trying watercolor, and then started trying collage, and then started writing little essays about the ways that the quotes felt oddly relevant to my life. And those pages eventually numbered 232.
Well, so much of what you're saying is resonating. I mean, the idea of being on this, like as a society, we are constantly producing, and then we have this pandemic, which kind of forces us to slow down. It's not an active decision to slow down.
Right.
But then there were things like being on leave and moving that kind of like on top of it really got you in this place, it sounds like, of how do I cope with the silence? And how do I cope with the idea of not producing? And even though you probably are producing, but not really thinking of it as producing,
Yeah.
and how, because for so many of us, including myself, so much of our identity has been wrapped in being in producing, whether it be a podcast or for me, it's like, how many clients do I see a week? And or if producing that big project that you need for work. And when we have that taken away or we're not in that, what do we do in that space? And I think about what Misty talked about in our episode about how for many of us, the pandemic was an example of this, but I think grief is an example of this, leaving a job is an example of this, of transitions. And generally, we as a human species are very uncomfortable with transitions. We don't like to be in the middle of the crosswalk. We want to be on either side. And if we are in the middle, we are rushing, sprinting to get to the other side. And one thing really beautiful about your book is it was really about being in the crosswalk and coping with that, which is something that maybe leave and time and space and pandemic allowed you to do. And many people may not have the financial means to do that, so that brings the conversation around money in, but assuming that even if we are taken care of financially or we're working and we can do that, sometimes we'll actively choose not to do that, and we will make lateral moves that might not be great. I work with a lot of people. I've done this myself. I'm truly guilty of a lot of what I say. But, you know, you get in that next relationship or you get in that next job that you didn't take that time of being in the middle of the crosswalk I think I said sidewalk, but middle of the crosswalk. You didn't take that time to be in the middle of the crosswalk to really assess what you need for yourself. And I look at your book as being in the middle of the crosswalk and figuring out what to do.
I love that, metaphor so much, because I think I would not have been in the middle of the crosswalk were it not for the confluence of pandemic and leaving a job. And I have gotten so much out of the fertile void of that space and have gotten so much out of it that I feel almost like evangelical around helping support other people to just like however they can in their own life. Not everybody can take that time off, but there are ways that we can take like a minute here and there. And, I always tell people just like track your screen time for a week. You have more hours than you think. But there's so much that comes out of like one, just sitting still, two, the not knowing, and three, the like articulating of the not knowing. So much of my book project, which is really not for everybody, but is about the tension of knowing and not knowing. It's not at all that I quit my job, moved to the country, figured it all out. As Jenny says in her book, the kind of doing nothing is a lifelong process, and sort of figuring out the question of how we navigate our own attention is a lifelong process. And so, the either end of the crosswalk might be figured out and might change. And there's all sorts of ways that people are in the crosswalk, whether that's in the like being in a sandwich generation and caring for elders while you're caring for small children, or being in between jobs, or being uncertain in a relationship, or being just the liminality of this political moment. There's sort of lots of unknown in the world, and I think the more comfortable we can get with being in the middle and not just trying to get to the other side, there's a lot that opens up there. Although it can be very uncomfortable and scary and all sorts of feelings that I totally understand.
Yeah, I mean, one thing in the work that I do that I feel so humbled by is to help people and see them in the crosswalk, and also just normalize that it's scary for a lot
Yeah.
of people. And I see a handful of people in tech, and if you really look at being in the middle of the crosswalk, that is scary, and that feeling of I'm gonna be hit by a car at any second, and I might as well stick with what I know even though it's killing my soul. I think Megan referenced this in my episode with her, how she found working with animals and with the animal
Mm.
shelter as this, it gave her an answer to getting out of a crisis that she really didn't know was a crisis until she knew it. And we're so programmed to be disconnected to what we need. I'll see people who will often just keep working, 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 and then they have all these like health issues and haven't really connected the dots that, oh, yeah, if you're going to keep working and not eat, or if you're going to keep working and not exercise, or clench your jaw, or whatever it is, and you're that disconnected from your body and your surrounding, it's gonna, your body's gonna wear down. Maybe when we're younger, we can get away with bouncing back and
Yeah,
putting ourselves, but I think aging is also an important part of
totally.
this conversation. That our bodies just aren't meant to hold that level of dissonance or disconnect.
Yeah, and that culture of productivity is so disembodied in so many ways. And I say this as someone who is not, who's sort of like, somatic curious or something like that, but is still like on a journey to like understand the connection between these things. And we just generally don't have a culture where we are kind of connecting our bodies to our minds to what's happening in the world. And I think we need more models of that because it really isn't easy. And I think that when people pretend that it is, or pretend that the sort of solutions to these crises, even if you're talking about somebody doing a soul destroying job and just stop doing it or something, I find that kind of advice to be so disingenuous because it isn't actually clear what to do on the other side.
Mm.
And so I really sympathize with people who continue to do the thing that they know. And I think part of articulating both that the crosswalk is a space that we can be in and what's possible, all the myriad things that might be possible on the other side is part of that project collectively.
Yeah. It reminds me of the title of this podcast, The Only Way Out is Through, that we have
Totally.
to get through it because,
Mhm.
as you said, we don't know what's on that other side. How could we run to something that we don't even know is there? And there's something about the being curious about where we're at right now in the moment we're in that I think is so important. Your book, and I reviewed a PDF of it. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see the tactile part of it, but I know that that was so important to you in our previous conversation. And there's also something in this moment that I think we're craving tactile. Full disclosure, I have a going back to music, I have a record collection, which is I'm very proud of. But lately I've been drawn back to CDs and cassettes. I've been going to
Mm.
these thrift stores and collecting the tactile thing because it's
Yeah,
so I don't know, it makes me listen to music differently, and there's an
absolutely.
episode I do with, Why Vinyl Matters with,
Yeah.
I think it's episode I can't remember the number, but we talk a little bit about this. There's a tactile nature to your book, even though I didn't have it in my hands, and I think that was the unconventionality of it all, the handwritten notes, the sketches, the photos, the kind of book reports and reflections. It really made the book feel tactile and personal, like I'm reading your own personal journal and scrapbook. So, and I'm aware I keep referring it to book, but I'm not quite sure what genre to put it in. So help us understand that. And also, was it your intention to make it more tactile?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. One thing that is interesting about it is that it's handmade nature, which I got a lot out of, as I was saying earlier, the sort of practice of coming into this shed that I'm in right now and handwriting these quotes or making collages. I continued to do it because it was fun, not because I like felt like I had to. It brought me real pleasure and it was a relief from work and caregiving, something I was doing just for myself, but it was also made by hand because I don't have the technical skills to have done it any other way. I think that a proper designer probably would have made this project digitally, and there were many times that I wished that I knew how to do that because, when I was making a final product and deciding to bind it in if there was like a mistake in a quote, I rewrote that quote. So there are pages that I have rewritten many, many times in terms of doing the layout. And eventually, when I did digitize it, there were things because I had support that someone else just like took a cursor and moved over for me and it just blew my mind. It was something that took me hours and days of redoing many times that would have taken like a second, but I also know that I got so much out of the time and thought of the redoing. It made me think about it differently. There was a way that I became absorbed in the project because it was handmade. And now that I have started sharing it with people, I always aspired for it to be a bound book. So it was 200 loose leaf pages. Picture a scrapbook that you made in middle school. That is like not that far from what it looks like. I did always know that I wanted those pages eventually to be in a bound book. I did not actually know how to take those 200 pages and get it into the form of a bound book. The pages were oversized, so they weren't pages that I could just put on a flatbed scanner, which I tried at some point to do. I also tried taking photographs of the pages and then digitizing them, and they came out fine, but not very good, and eventually I got some support. I hired someone to help me take really high quality photographs of those pages and help put them into a book form. And I have noticed that the physical book and the scrapbooky nature and the handmade nature of it is really what people respond to. And I think in so many ways, it's very cute. But also part of that, I think, is a response to the like endless scroll and the kind of reading that people are doing on screens. It's like a physical object that you can hold. It has a beginning and an end. It's the kind of project that you don't need to like read linearly. When you were saying you haven't read every sentence, like you really don't need to. It's a project that you can open kind of to any page and be able to at least get the gist of what I'm trying to say, which is like a reading of like my experience of reading Jenny's book. And in sharing that with people, I have gotten so many beautiful responses from other people kind of marking up my book and then taking a picture and sending me their version of that page in the text. And it's so just joyful, and making things with your hands just connects you to a different part of your brain. And so beyond the pleasure of it, I think there's lots of cognitive value to it that I haven't yet done all the research about, but I know there is research that exists that just puts you in a different frame of mind. So I also, although all of it is handmade because I didn't know any other way to do it, it was both fun and I know how much it put me into a different frame of mind.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I loved most about it was that I felt like I was reading somebody's journal and their scrapbook, essentially. Let's take a break and return to our conversation with Christie George. And there is this thing about our relationship to the materials that we're working with that you just don't get in digitizing or I think about like AI and how we're moving toward this world in which we're like manufacturing an experience, and I'm trying to go in the opposite direction. I'm
Yeah.
trying to go back into glue paper, my physical CDs, because there's a relationship, and a lot of my best childhood memories were about things I made with my hands and alphabetizing my record collection and CDs, these things that you just don't get in a more digital AI world. Even like I made a film with my partner and we made it right as AI was coming in, and we decided to not incorporate any AI. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that would have been nice to have a little section with a little cartoon or something. But we ended up using other means to get the story across. And I am glad I did that because it feels more me than if we got some AI generated image to do the work. And you're right, I think that just changes our brain chemistry. It makes us feel less alone because loneliness isn't just about people and being with people, it's about connection to all these other things, right? Connection to our creativity. As a songwriter, it pains me to think that people can make music based on an AI like rhythm. Um, and that just to me, it's like, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
And I really got that connection in your book. It came from the heart, it came from your hands, it came from your mind and your emotions that I don't think you can get in any other way. I hear you about, yeah, I often don't know the technology either, so I kind of have to resort to these things by necessity, and technology can help a lot, but I think the foundation of it, I prefer a more pen and paper. experience.
Yeah, it's such an example. Part of the reason I mention it is because what felt initially to me like the kind of downside of my abilities or something turned out to be the very reason this project feels so special, both to me and to other people. It would look so different if I had done it digitally, which is not to say that you can't do it digitally. And obviously, I know how many designers can make such beautiful work not with their hands. But in my case, I think that the end product is also actually better because of this thing that was, maybe a negative thing to begin with, my lack of technical skill. It feels more human.
It feels more human, and I like to use the word magical, like, there's
Mhm,
something magic
mhm,
making about
mhm.
it that you kinda learn as you go, that I am one of those people that, like, I need to do it to learn, and I need to do it over and over and over, and then when you do get it, it's like magic.
Yeah.
It feels like
Yeah,
magic.
absolutely. There's a feeling, I don't know, I should look at the book if it was sort of if it's chronological enough to realize that, like, did my drawings get better? I don't really know, my drawings are terrible, um, but it's also, like, it's sort of not the point. They're like I think that the drawings are pretty bad, and but I think you can really see the pleasure in them,
Mhm.
that I think is what attracts people to the project. I have learned in sort of like getting notes and back, from people who've seen it.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of a lot of Brené Brown's work on imperfection
Mm.
and the value of imperfection. I wonder, how has your life changed in creating The Emergency Was Curiosity?
Oh, it's changed completely. I made this project initially for myself. I was planning to bind a couple copies, give one to Jenny, give one to my parents, give one to myself. But in sharing the draft of it with a few people before I made a final print of it, one of those people responded to the draft, which was in a kind of Google Doc form with her own 17-page Google Doc reception to the project, like a book report about the book report. And it was such a profound experience. I didn't know her. It had been passed along by a mutual friend. And the fact that I didn't know this person, they lived on the other side of the world. She was in New Zealand, and yet could reflect back to me so much about the project that I didn't see. Like, she understood one of the things that I struggled with while I was making it was I couldn't figure out why I kept making it. It felt like it had no
Mm,
point. It was like I'm like, "Why am I still doing this thing? It's so weird." I couldn't really explain it to people. It wasn't for work. Sometimes my mom would ask me, "Is it for work or is it for fun?" And I was sort of like, "I don't know." And this person, Elizabeth, could really articulate back to me all of the value of the project, and on top of that, share her own experience, reading Jenny's book, her experience reading my book about Jenny's book, and I just was floored by the reception to it and felt like, "Wait, is this what happens when you share your work with other people? Like, I'll tell anybody now about this." The level of, intimacy and connection as a result of just having this one person read this Google Doc was unbelievable, like, so far exceeded any other kind of, professional interaction I might have had until that point, and so
mm,
I kind of decided that I wanted to share it, wider than my initial plan and started printing the book. It's a big book and is expensive to print, so I was printing it kind of 20 copies at a time and then would run
mm,
out and then would print another 20 and sort of didn't wanna be in the position of printing more than I could, like, sell to people. And then I had the opportunity through a friend to do an exhibition about the project. I had never done an exhibition before, much like I had never done a book before. And the figuring out of how to make an exhibition about a book that's about another book was so fun. And I wanted the exhibition to be about the process of it because it's so much a process project. And I also wanted the exhibition to be a way to help people exercise their own attention without having to make a 200-page book over 3 years, and that interactive aspect of the exhibition ended up being so joyful, that I ended up having other exhibitions. Other venues had contacted me and then started keeping a kind of live journal, like on Substack, about the process of trying to figure out how to get this project into the world. So, very, very, very meta. And the experience of that has been generative. I'm connected to all sorts of people that I wouldn't have imagined. And so now what I've learned is, like, just keep going. I have no idea what the next iteration of this project is, but in many ways, it doesn't have to do with this book or with Jenny's book at all. It ends up having to do with some of the ideas that come out of the work. So, for example, the kind of 3 threads that I'm pulling now, which are a little bit in the book, but maybe not as much as I would have imagined, are motherhood and creativity, which is like my kids are all over the project. I wrestle a lot with, like, how do you make time and space for creativity when you're also having to care for young children? And it has been hugely generative. And I'm in a community of people who are also interested in that subject. So that's one. The second is that I've become very interested in archives. The subtitle of my own project is that it's an archive of attention and it's a pandemic scrapbook. And I both want everyone to be able to have the time and space to make their own little zine pandemic scrapbook. But also, I'm just very interested in archives in general. Like, what ends up being in the official archive of any experience? And I think that the official pandemic archive, wherever it is, or whatever it is, or whoever's in charge of it, really only tells a really small sliver of the story by definition. And archives are usually only a reflection of whoever has power over the archive anyway. And so I've become very interested in, like, how can we interrupt the archive, and what are the kinds of things we need to do in order to make alter archives, and, like, what are they comprised of, and what are the alter archives that already exist? For example, I recently in Sonoma County found this place, someone told me about it, called the Sitting Room, which is an archive in a former professor's home dedicated to, like, feminist scholarship and writing, and it is the most amazing place, and it's been around for 40 years and was created to interrupt what the archive of literature normally is. So I'm interested in archives, and then the last thing is around book reports as a form. I'm really into book reports because I'm never gonna read all the books I wanna read, and I am really often only interested in a book because I wanna hear what this other person has to say about it, and so I feel as if I can, like, tell enough people and model for enough people book reports as a thing, there may be another form or a genre or something that people use to kind of communicate with. So I say that as examples of, like, if you had told me 5 years ago, I would be, like, writing and thinking and talking about motherhood and creativity and archives and book reports. My background was as an investor in media startups. I would have, not believed you, and somehow at the same time, it feels like an extension of all of my, professional work up until this point. Both things are true.
Yeah, I like that. And I want to go back to something you said about your experience resonating for others. That's also that to me, that feels like part of the magic of creating and doing it in this relatable way. I don't know if I'll keep this in, but when I made the film, it was so the film is about colonial mentality and my experience with and I go through the history of the Philippines and how we got here. And I have this really uncomfortable moment in the film where I put clothespins on my nose growing up. And I hate that part of the film.
Yeah.
And it was to emulate a more Western nose. And I thought as an 8-year old, like if I stuck this clothespin on my nose, I would look more white. I hated that part of the film. My partner was insistent on keeping it, and that is the part of the film that everybody, not just Filipino Americans, but everybody resonates with, and it starts a deeper conversation around, why do I do the things I do? And oh, it's probably embedded in the archives or the stories that we've received. And to me, that felt magical, that this moment of kind of embarrassment and shame really became this vehicle with which other people can enter that part of their awareness. And so your book and the part about motherhood and creativity, I mean, that is a big, those are two distinct identities that don't have a lot of time for each other. And I have worked with a lot of mothers who feel a lot of shame around leaning into one versus the other. And just to have that awareness and that conversation minimizes the shame by like 90% because you're talking about it. And I think that's the magic of these works that are not these polished AI generated projects, but they are coming from the heart and they're more relatable.
I so appreciate your sharing that story and can so relate to the not wanting to leave it in there and commend you for leaving it in there. And I do think that I have seen over and over again the vulnerability that people share is like what people connect around. And in my own project, I don't even think I was like, I still struggle with it. So I don't even think I was like that vulnerable. But one thing that there's one line in the book that says, I am so lonely sometimes, which is true. And I don't say anything more about it than that. But that single line has brought me connected to so many people, both that I know very well and that I don't know very well. And just writing that one line was enough to give them permission to share about their own loneliness. And I have been so blown away by that because I didn't particularly feel brave enough to say anything more about it than that. That felt like a sort of like the most I could do. Um, and I have gotten so much out of, yeah, people sharing in return. And so much of why I keep going with the project, which from an economics perspective, like really makes no sense. It's like expensive to produce and I distribute the thing myself. So I'm like mailing things out and sometimes meeting people, driving to their house and giving them a copy of the book. Like it's so inefficient. Um, but also delightful, but so much of the reason that I continue with it is because I feel like your word magical or it's like tapping into a different way of relating to people that just I did not have access to before. So I don't know what I was doing before. I felt like a very well-adjusted person who had nice intimate relationships with people. Um, but definitely nothing like whatever is happening now. And
Yeah.
so the more that I continue with the sharing of it, it's not like really selfless. It's really that I get a lot out of what I get in return. And it's very difficult once you have access to that to give it up.
Yes, and you're answering we are answering my next couple of questions. It sounds like the response has been really positive to the book. People are connecting with it, and that you have found meaning and connection from just putting this out there in the world and it being this thing that has unintentionally connected you to something greater than yourself, which um I think that's the magic that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I say that like it's such a specific project. It really doesn't work for everybody. It's not very linear. It's sort of random, but for the people that it does connect with, it's so generative for both of us. And because I am selling the book myself, it's in bookstores, it's in some bookstores, but the books that I sell myself, I, like, know exactly where it is in the world.
Mm.
Like, I know who bought it. I have a spreadsheet, I have to mail it. I handwrite the, addresses, and there is so much intimacy in that also that is just really wonderful.
I love that. I love that, that it has that personal touch, and we're going the opposite direction of AI, which I really love. Um, do you have any advice for those who might be struggling with this need to be productive and that getting in the way with just noticing and leaning into their creativity?
I think my advice would be to start very, very, very small. So you don't need to quit your job and move to the country and make a book. There are ways that we can interrupt, pause our own relentless lives in ways that will then open things up down the line. So that might look as small as taking a 15-minute walk. I don't think people need me to tell them those small things, but the things that I have gotten a lot out of are going for walks without my headphones in, without listening to a podcast or making a phone call, which is sometimes really hard to do. Um, and so I say 15 minutes because it doesn't need to be longer than that, but that's like a sort of doable way to start. I really subscribe to and do morning pages. I don't always get to them, but morning pages are 3 pages of stream of consciousness writing first thing in the morning when you wake up. And you kind of have to wake up about 45 minutes earlier than you would normally wake up in order to do them and have your day continue. I do them before my kids wake up. So, in order to do that, I have to wake up earlier in order to do them. But I have found that to be like, no matter what, even if I haven't done anything else, and even if I have 10 other productivity-oriented deliverables during the day, having started the day with this thing that is for no one but yourself is a really doable way to just get yourself into the practice of, yeah, doing things that are not productivity-oriented. So, go for a walk, do morning pages. Morning pages comes from a book called The Artist's Way that some people might be familiar with. I think I bought that book 20 years ago and just could not get through it. I don't know how people get through it on their own. I eventually read it in a group. And so we read, it's 12 chapters. We read one chapter a week. And that was the way I was able to get through it. But one of the things that I've only ever managed to do morning pages in terms of the like advice that that book offers. But I have done the exercise of listening to a full album.
Mm,
So
I like
that's like
that.
a thing that doesn't happen that much anymore, but it's also a way to just like shift up your attention is just like listen to a whole album, don't skip, whether you like it or not, like start to finish. And it just changes something for you. I'm very into small doable things as ways to change behavior. I'm always tempted to like make some big dramatic change, but I either never get to it or certainly never stick with it.
Yeah, there's something about the ritualistic practices of both of those things that
Mhm.
when we're in the middle of the crosswalk that can help us really not respond so reactively
Yeah.
to the things happening, but kind of ground us. And I always like the morning pages because I look at it as like the vomit that you need to get out of your head before
Yeah.
you're actually creative. I haven't
Yeah.
tried the music one, but that's any reason to listen to some
Yeah.
of my favorite albums I will take. I have two more questions for you, but before I proceed, is there anything that in the conversation that we left out that you might want to bring up? Any points that you might wanna emphasize?
I really liked your question about, handmade work, and I wanted to share that one thing I have started doing with people, and it came as a response to people's responses to my project. So, in some cases, people would see the book and one reaction, not the only one, but certainly a common one, is a feeling of regret that they hadn't memorialized their own pandemic experience better, that they didn't have like a nice deliverable to show for themselves. And that's obviously not my intention in sharing the project, but I really think there is tremendous individual and collective value in remembering that time, particularly the early pandemic time, and I hear you when you say, like, I really don't wanna go back there, or I don't wanna remember when we were washing our vegetables and didn't wanna, like, get near people when I was walking the dog, and I think that we sometimes do ourselves a disservice in not honoring kind of negative memories alongside positive ones. So, part of the value of my own project for me is that I was recording in real time the good and the bad, and I have just found that to feel just more real, not like the version of life that is on social media or an aspirational version of a life, certainly a mediated version of life, but a mediated version that was like what it was, the sort of totality of the experience, the kind of grief alongside the joy, which is, I think, what life really is. Everything is happening at the same time. I don't experience life as something where things are all good or all bad. Like it's often just usually is simultaneously sometimes incredibly joyful and totally terrible. And so I started working with people to make their own one page pandemic archives of attention, sort of in the form of one page zine. And I do these workshops where they're for adults, but they come and often many of them have not made a zine before. Sometimes they're people who used to make zines and are happy to have the excuse to make them. But one of the things that I've observed from facilitating the workshops is how much joy even the most kind of curmudgeonly workshop attendee who is there because they were sort of forced to be there or something for some reason has in, like, having permission to just, like, use scissors and glue and draw and be working with their hands. It's, like, a tiny thing just for them. It really just, like, doesn't matter, and if you're, like, a person who is working on a computer all the time, you don't necessarily have a reason to work with your hands and to be working with your hands in that very specific kindergarten kind of way, and I have just now had the experience many times of being with adults in a room where they are cutting and pasting and gluing and collaging and drawing, and it's a really lovely thing to do. So, I wanna try to find a way myself to, like, sort of make that workshop accessible to as many people as possible, but also I mention it just to say that there is a lot of value, even if you don't consider yourself an artist, in just like taking a 1 hour class where you do something with your hands. It's a lovely release, but also often leads to some wonderful other things.
I love that, and I think we all deserve some permission to play.
Yes, absolutely.
Some of us have never learned how to play,
Yeah.
and that we don't need to emulate or create a Michelangelo piece. Like, we can be messy in our process and we can play, and I think that's just such an important part of being a person. And then you also said the part about just allowing people to feel and experience and process and memorialize those difficult times, and I think that is so important that if we can't feel pain, how can we experience joy? They're emotions, right? That we can't, like, that's part of the human experience is ex- exploring and experiencing all of the many emotions and the complex emotions that we have.
Yeah, and also I'm remembering what you said earlier because I sort of made some notes. We think we have moved on, right, from that like 2020 moment, but actually, so much of our current moment is a response to that. And so, by not actually processing it or trying to do those things like move on or get back to normal or whatever those platitudes are that I don't even believe are possible, but that we are sort of pretending that we are doing, we obscure so much of like the reason why we are here, and then also it prevents us from seeing like what's a way to move forward, or to the in your language, what's the way to move through.
Yeah, we are still in the middle of that crosswalk.
We really are.
And I think as long as we're alive, we're in the middle of that crosswalk.
You're telling me we never get to the other side? Oh
We
no.
might have some pit
Yeah.
stops or some illusions of of getting to the other side. Where can listeners find out more about you, and how can they access your book if they want to buy a copy?
I released the book on something called Meta Label, which is a new platform for releasing creative projects. And one of the things I love about Meta Label is that it really values kind of small releases and honors small releases and honors releasing in community. So you can find the project there at Meta Label. And you can also find the project and more about it at christiemgeorge.com. I have a newsletter that I write on Substack called Practice, which is about the releasing of the project and also a way to keep myself devoted to my own practice now that I'm not actually writing the book. The making of this book project has turned me on to the idea of having a creative practice, but without a book to work on, I was trying to figure out a way to keep myself, like, maybe accountable, but also devoted to just keeping creativity in my life now that I didn't have a big project, and writing about the release of it has actually been a really wonderful creative outlet, so you can go to any of those places to find out more about what I'm up to now.
Great. And we'll have those links in the episode description box so to make it easy for folks. I have one last question, and this one is, I think, we're very much related that you are on a deserted island and you have 3 physical albums to listen to. No MP3 player, no iPhone. You got the physical CD or record or cassette, whatever your preference is, but you have 3 albums that you're gonna listen to for the rest of your life. Which 3 albums would you bring with you?
I loved this question, and, I think so much of the experience of listening to music is about time and sort of where you were in time when you first heard that music. So the 3 albums I chose were about kind of like different times in my life. So it's both about the music, but also about what the album brings me back to, which felt like it would be important if I were by myself on an island. So the first album is the Indigo Girls, Rites of Passage, classic
Oh,
from
I
1992.
I have that on cassette. I
Amazing!
love that with Virginia Woolf and Love Will
Yes.
Come to You, and Galileo was the
Yes,
big.
yes. I think I
Oh.
had it on no, I had it on CD, I guess. I had it on CD. But I hadn't thought about that album in forever, and, I think there was, like, a reunion concert, or maybe
Mhm.
they didn't need to reunite, but there was a concert in San Francisco at Stern Grove, earlier this summer. I didn't go, but,
Oh.
it really made me think a lot um, about their music and that time in my life and just kind of coming into listening to music on my own. So that's number 1. Number 2 is Mos Def, Black on Both Sides, which came out in
Uh-huh.
1999, which is when I
99.
graduated college, and,
Uh-huh.
I lived in Fort Greene, Brooklyn in 1999, and that album was, like, the soundtrack to my life at that particular
Mm.
moment and place. And then, the last is a more recent album by Big Thief, and it's called Dragon, New Warm Mountain, I Believe in You. And the
Mm.
album title is so long that I never actually remember the full title and had to write it down. But the songwriting is really beautiful and it's a long album. So it felt like an important thing to have on a desert island so that I wouldn't just be listening to 4 songs over and over. And it's, a really, really, really gorgeous album, and, I love that band and got to see them this summer, and I just found out this morning that they watch a lot of basketball, which I do also,
Mm.
and so
Mm.
that, feels important, to me.
Yeah. I will have to check that last one out. The first 2 I'm familiar with, but the last one I'm
So
not.
I'm very happy to be able to be the person to introduce you to Big Thief.
Yes.
They're great.
Okay, okay. I love discovering new music, and I love the fact that you've chosen specific albums for different eras of your life. And that is, I'm going to use that word again, but the magic of creativity and music, that we can hear the Indigo Girls and it brings us back to a place in time, and that it connects us to others, and that we get inspired by, like, I know that in some ways all the albums that speak to me have inspired my own song, not just my songwriting, but other things in my life and other places. And just like your book has caused an imprint or created an imprint on many others. So, yeah, it's the magic of creativity.
Absolutely.
I have so enjoyed our conversation, and it's been just wonderful hearing about your work and how it came out of this kind of a therapeutic experience and it started as a very internal thing and it became very external, and it's sounds like it's changed your life and how you look at life, but also the people like sharing that has also given you this new approach to life that maybe wasn't there before.
Absolutely. Yeah. It has been a really wonderful experience to be inside this project and to have a reason to connect with other people like you. So I just think of it as like the gift that keeps on giving. You and I would not have met were it not for this project. And so I just appreciate the gift that it's given me and hope to use it to connect with other people.
I really enjoyed that conversation with Christie and hearing more about her creative process that gave birth to the emergency was curiosity. She reminds me to slow down and reflect that when I'm chasing down my productivity goals for the week, I also need to stay committed to the importance of play and imagination. In a time of AI and instant access, where we're bombarded by quick dopamine rushes through technology, combined with this growing pressure to produce, isolation and mental health can be easily compromised. Our relationship to the tangible and tactile, our connection to ourselves and others is in crisis. And this interview helped remind me that there's other ways of getting through these uncertain times. I hope you found some wisdom or inspiration today and allow yourself sometimes to be curious or just play. Thanks again for listening to Out is Through. Until next time. The views expressed by the speakers are their own, and their appearance on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Out is Through is a podcast for entertainment and educational purposes only. It's not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are in need of support, please seek out a licensed mental health professional in your area.